As one of many here who's about to take their leap into their future career, I want a job where I can be rewarded, where I can be appreciated, not just stuck at a base pay for years, not just getting by, not just doing my job. I want to be someone who excels and strives in the profession I choose to go into, and that is why I'm so proud to propose, because that is what we want to do in the teaching career. 3 things on this debate: firstly on setup, secondly on how we improved incentives for teachers to strive for the best education outcomes, and secondly, and thirdly on how teaching becomes a more attractive and enjoyable vocation. So firstly on setup, I'd like to quickly touch on our model, how we would implement this this pay. So teachers would be getting a fair base pay salary that is around 100% livable on its own. After that, they would receive bonuses based on the improvement of their students. This would look like testing, monitoring test improvement throughout the year. I'd like to note 3 things on this. Firstly, moderation must be done, so teachers cannot mark their own students' work without it being peer reviewed by someone else. If there's no other teacher in the faculty, they can go externally to another school. Second of all, I'd like to note that there's no extra testing that needs to be done for most, as testing already happens throughout the year. Thirdly, I would also like to note that we would take into account extenuating situations. For example, if we have someone who's excessively absent because they're in hospital, we would not take that into account because the teacher has not been with them for enough. Or if we have an extremely misbehaving student who's been getting suspended, we're not going to take that into account because they've proven that they will not listen to the teacher, therefore it is not a reflection of the teacher. Now, I'd also like to point out why the system is likely to be done well. Now, this will be government run as well, and we give you 3 reasons for this. First of all, the government are accountable to the media, so we are likely to see these base pay rates and these bonuses be fair and accountable. Second of all, we think that teacher unions will also be on their doorstep if they're doing something stupid. For example, if they're not giving them a good pay raise, as they don't seem to be at the moment, we see the teachers unions are striking back, so we do see that they will be held accountable in this account. And then thirdly, we do see that they do care to a degree about the education of the children, especially because, these are their children in this, so we are likely to see that this will be done well. I will take a POI before I move on.
Oh, right. So how is any of this actually mutually exclusive under your side if under the status quo the government is already accountable to the media and teachers do have unions?
No, I think that just means that what we're going to do will be done well. That's what I was just trying to prove there. Now on to my point on how there will be more incentives for teachers to strive towards the best education outcomes. So first of all, I want to look at what teacher incentives are. So we think first of all, most generally do care about the students, but the main care for them is the money, because it is a job. There is no shame in that. I mean, if I'm working at a job, I'm not going to stay just because I'm not getting paid anymore, just because I seem to enjoy it. 3 reasons. First of all, yeah, it is a job. There's no shame in wanting money. Second of all, they need to live, They're going to strive to get the most money they can to live comfortably because it's just a basic human need, right? And third of all, we see that there's a lot of children to care about. Like, teachers often teach, for example, 100 students a year. There's a lot of kids to care about. We think that they're likely to care about the money and the teacher and the kids, but more so the money because, again, it is a job. So therefore, their greatest incentive in the role is to be paid. Now, it's also important to note what this looks like in the status quo. So teachers are being paid the same, a little bit more for seniority if you've been there for 10 years, and a little bit more for positions, i.e. deaning. But we think that's a separate factor, as that's a whole new responsibility. That's not in the classroom, that's kind of outside of it. Now, what does this mean? This means that it incentivizes doing enough, right? It incentivizes getting your kids to at least the majority pass, This looks like giving out notes, workbooks, answering questions properly, like a tutorial or 2 before quarterly exams, but they don't have an incentive to strive for success. Why is this? Because their time and energy could be placed elsewhere, right? It is a cost-benefit analysis because, again, it is a job. We may hear from negating that teachers want their students to do the best, and I think that's true to a degree. However, we do believe that some teachers are just in it for the money. You know, it is a job. Again, like, teachers don't necessarily have to care about students. Teachers don't necessarily have to care about students to want to go into teaching. Like, we do believe there are people who don't. Like, we all have bad teachers, and I think we can all point them out in our minds. But a few things on this, like, the majority that do care about the students. So if you think, first of all, they view the year as a repetitive process. It is quite mundane and the same. There is no reason to switch up the habits that they're doing at the moment. There's no reason to improve. Second of all, they have pre-prepared resources. Why would you want to change and improve them? What you already have. And we think, third of all, you know, it is often boring. You know, a job gets tiring. People have iffy moods. Kids can be difficult. Kids can misbehave. Therefore, there are things that stop them from being great. However, what we do is we add a monetary incentive. And we see teachers are likely to make a greater effort because this is such a huge incentive for them. Now, this will probably look like things, for example, more tutorials leading up to exams, but also throughout the year. Second of all, we see an effort to create and find new resources to give to the students out of their own time. And third of all, to make engaging content, stuff that will actually keep the kids involved and keep them learning. They now feel like they have to try harder. Even if they thought that they were doing well at the time, they have that incentive at their doorstep. They're being told to do the best, so then they get paid more. They also have the secondary thing of they feel like they're being judged, especially by their colleagues and people above them, because, again, they are being assessed themselves. And first of all, they care about their reputation, that they're going to try and do well to appease people. And second of all, there is that human drive to do better, especially when you're being assessed. Now, what are the impacts of this? I think, first of all, this means that children are likely to have more support, more resources and help, as teachers have an incentive to do the best that they can. They have more of an effort. And sure, this won't make a difference for some teachers, but we think the fact that this will make a difference in so many other teachers will be so huge because there are so many students out there. This will mean that studying and learning becomes, you know, more enjoyable and easier for students. We also think that they're more likely to feel supported by their teachers, which is better for their mental health and self-confidence, especially when we see such low mental health among students at the moment because they don't feel like they're being supported by the people around them. We also see that people are likely to see better grades. Now, this is important, really, really important. Why is this? Because it gives children, you know, freedom to choose their future, to choose to become that doctor or that engineer. And it also means that children will look fondly upon their education. We have to win on this, even if you don't buy the next point, which I'll go into on how we make the role a lot more attractive. So at the moment, teaching is kind of looked down upon. Now, this is for four main reasons. Like, I mean, first of all, there's no career advancement really, apart from you go to like dean, DP, principal. Second of all, a lot of teachers hate on the job. Like, I can't name many teachers who actually say to me, I really enjoy my job. A lot of them complain about their classes before. I think it does give students coming through a really bad image of the teaching job. Third of all, I think there is a base set pay for a while. Like, it is harder to improve. And fourth of all, I think that children can be difficult. Now, this is all evident to the fact that nobody is coming into the teaching career, and it's clearly a problem on NZSDC status quo. Now, I give you two reasons as to why we make this better. First of all, it gives teachers the chance to advance. There's a promise to be paid well if you work hard, more than at least in the status quo. Now, this has three things. Yeah, I mean, first of all, people like the ladder. People like moving up. Like, that's why people choose to work hard jobs. Second of all, you know, it's rewarding to see your hard work pay off. Everyone loves that. Third of all, you know, you actually see a light at the end of the tunnel. You see your work is important. You see a goal there. You see that you're trying to meet this, get to this bonus category, you know? So there is a goal there. Now, the impacts of this is we often going to see, you know, it's going to be attract people with a better work ethic, right? Because I often see people view teaching as like an easy escape, right? It's a base set pay, it's something that you just have to do, and I think we want to get rid of this narrative and attract people who do want to work hard and want to advance through the career. I also think that, second of all, people will feel more recognised. Now, if you're teaching, you will see the recognition for your hard work you put into your student. Like, in the status quo, I don't think there is much recognition that they get except for, like, you know, a card at the end of the year, and I think this is really disheartening for teachers. It's, you know, you want to feel respected, you want to feel like you're being appreciated. And I think that we do this on-site affirming. Why? Because, you know, teachers feel like they're being well done. They're getting that well done for that hard work, which I think is a lot better for their mental health. And they also know that they're important. Like, people are actually looking out for them. People want them to be rewarded for their hard work. I think this results in a better work environment, a much more attractive work environment, because at the moment, you know, we're just being rewarded for doing a job. But what we want to do on affirming is being rewarded for the quality of work that you do, not just being there. And I think that's why you have to side with side affirming. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for their speech and invite up the first negating speaker.
Look, I think the thing that they are trying to prove and decide affirming is that by implementing this system, we will just get better teaching and better education. If we can prove that it is worse under their side, we win this debate. Okay, a few things for you in my speech today. No rebuttal will just be integrated. Firstly, a little bit of a disagreement under their setup and like pointing out flaws with the setup that exists. Then I'll be going on to why this is just an ineffective representation of teachers' ability, and then lastly on why the quality of teaching decreases. Okay, first of all, like yes, we agree it probably will be around like grades and testing. If you purely judge this on improvement, I think this is just really unfair to like higher level teachers who are teaching year 13s, because now every single teacher is ensuring that these kids have like A+ grades. So by the time that they reach year 13, they just don't improve at all. Therefore, these teachers just have no like added benefit. We just think that this kind of really sucks for higher level teachers and immediately disincentivizes teachers in those roles. But then like second of all, we hear that like all teachers will be given a livable wage. We agree. We think we can do this under our side. This is not mutually exclusive to them. The issue with this is you do not incentivize those teachers who are quote unquote just in it for the money to do any better in their performance if they're able to simply live off of that money that they're earning, right? Like you're now just giving them that like benefit. But then also we want to say like we probably don't just let teachers slide who are letting every single student in their class like failing under our side, right? Like performance reviews exist. The Ministry of Education exists with the purpose of investigating schools who are underperforming and who are seeing students just being very unsuccessful. I think if you've got an issue with the level of education, like there's a few things you can do here. Firstly, you can just like change the curriculum, or second of all, like we can just give all teachers a little bit more money. Okay, now on to represent how this is an effective representation of a teacher's abilities. Context here is the same as my setup. Okay, the issue here is you are quantifying something that is actually truly unquantifiable, right? Because being a good teacher does not just mean your students are getting good grades, right? It means that you engage with your students on a personal level, you make it pleasant for them to be at school, and you make them want to show up every day, right? Note that the reason this is really difficult to measure under their side is like, what, are you going to pass out little notes saying, hey, please rank how happy you are to be in this teacher's class? No, you can't do that. It's way too subjective for that to impact on a teacher's pay, right? Like that will just never happen. What we get is like an acknowledgement of nuance. Like they've characterized for us, for teachers to earn more money, they have to do a few things. One is either just stay on for a long period of time in their job. We think this is just generally good under our side, because if you stay on in your job for a long period and you do know that you will get that benefit after 10 years of increased pay, this just keeps teachers in the job for a little bit longer. This is very, very important because it leads to like consistency in your educational system. But the second way in which teachers earn more money is through being promoted, right? This looks like going on to an interview with the Board of Trustees with a principal who is able to review your references, where they can see what was your relationship like with students in particular, what was it that made you a good teacher, not just about results, right? Like, and we will continue to explain why this is just a unique harm under their side. We see much more nuance under our side. When people start to earn more money, it is because they truly deserve it for the people that they are, rather than the students that they've got, which leads on to my second mechanism here, which is how this disproportionately harms people in low socioeconomic areas, right? Because these are the students who have the lowest capacity to do extremely well or to even improve substantially on their grades, right? I will walk you through why this is. First of all, let's just go up north, like somewhere in a very like poor area of where we're from. These are kids who like share a room with 5 other people. That means when they are given homework, they are not able to complete it at home because it is just not safe, or because there's just too many people. But like the second alternative to this is they have to work an extra job because they have to earn more money for their family so that they are able to live, so that they are able to eat. Now the second part of this is when they show up to class, they likely do not have the necessary stationery in order to achieve successfully in the class. Even if the teacher chooses to provide this for them, they just don't see education as being that important because they can't afford to go to university anyway, right? So why even put in the effort in the first place? Why this is so bad is on 2 different levels, right? This just sucks for those teachers, because if you have students who will just never care in any world over their own success, this teacher will just not be paid regardless of the amount of effort that they're putting in, which just disincentivizes them putting in good effort. Why this is so bad is when teachers stop putting in good effort, this is where the disproportionate tipping edge harm occurs to these students, because they just don't see that same level of support and they like just can't succeed, right? But then like third mechanism here is you just generally will have have students who struggle to succeed in any scenario. These are kids with really severe dyslexia or ADHD who will simply never perform that well. As they tell us, students who just act out a lot, will just not be accounted for in the results. What this means is students who have ADHD, that leads to them acting out in class, teachers just stop caring at all because their grades literally do not matter. Their income does not get impacted by these students' behaviour. It is not addressed. Therefore, these kids are just continued to be left in the dumps. We think this just really sucks. Now, lastly, we just don't think this is always a reflection on a teacher's capacity to teach, in the sense that you sometimes just end up with really, really smart kids, or with parents who are willing to spend thousands and thousands of dollars every single year in sending this child to private tutoring that might make it look like this child has a very good teacher, but in actuality, their parents are putting in all this background effort. Now you've just got people being unfairly rewarded for work that they simply have not done. We think that this is just not fair at all. The impact here, I think the biggest impact that we can prove to you here is the socioeconomic stuff. First of all, we see a major disparity where areas of high socioeconomic class now just do so much better, and this is already an existing issue in the world, right? You just make it so much larger. It is a snowball effect there. This continues on for life. This becomes a cyclical issue where people from low socioeconomic areas just do worse consistently. They start earning less money throughout their entire lives. They just live worse lives in the future. I'll quickly take a point.
If you say teachers can't succeed with students with bad home lives and dyslexia, are you saying those students cannot succeed in the education environment, and if so, why are they there?
No, we're just saying that when the pure focus is academics, teachers stop caring. Okay, listen to what I'm telling you, please. Okay, now onto the quality of education going down. Note this is directly contends with their material at first. The thing here is we just need to acknowledge that there's an international teacher shortage, and in countries like New Zealand, we are just seeing worse education overall, regardless of what's happening. First mechanism as to why we think this quality is going down is because there is now an actual incentive for teachers to start cheating when it comes to internal assessments, or maybe even external assessments. This has already happened in New Zealand under the status quo. Think about how much worse this becomes under their side when teachers pays when their entire life is contingent on the students' results in assessments, right? We think that this is just really, really bad because obviously the impacts of kids not learning effectively is massive. This looks like just struggling once they get to university, or actually just not having the knowledge they claim to have. Okay, secondly, this just disincentivizes for teachers who are unsure about their own performance to continue teaching, right? They'd now rather just take on a salesman job somewhere else, just leave the industry in its entirety because they are so worried about the fact that they will be paid poorly. But then this happens in a second way, in the sense that teachers now don't want to enter the job market. Students do not want to go into university to become teachers, which is a twofold harm. You're losing teachers at the top, but you're not able to replace them under their side. So this just means a reduction in the number of teachers. Overall, teachers would just rather work in more stable environments. The impacts will be outlined later on. So proud to negate.
I take the speaker for their speech and invite up the second affirmative speaker.
No, it's Tina. She's a little trashy now. Yeah.
I think NIG has lost the debate when they failed to prove any real benefits on their side of the house and have only really mitigated the benefits that we provide on our side. 4 things in the speech. Firstly, on the purpose of the education system. Secondly, how will this affect the quality of students' education? Thirdly, on how will this impact teachers? And finally, on the lower socioeconomic individuals and how this will impact them. Now, firstly, on the purpose of the education system. We hear from NIG that the education system has to care about like happiness, etc., etc. And this is unquantifiable. However, I think when you get down to it, the main purpose of the education system is to educate people. That is the purpose. And I think metrics like happiness do come through into test scores. For example, if you are extremely unhappy in class, you are unlikely to pay very close attention, you are unlikely to do very well in tests, and that means you're likely to score quite poorly on tests. However, if you're very happy and you really enjoy class, what does this mean? This means you're likely to pay attention. If your teacher is very supportive of you, this means you're likely to do well, and once again, this will reflect on test scores. So while a metric of measuring like academic improvements may not be perfect, I think at least to some degree, it is better than having no metric at all. Now, how will this affect students' educations? Note, I think this is the most important point in the debate because once again, the purpose of the education system is to educate students. So if we can prove on our side of the house that we do better educate students and we get better outcomes for them in the future, that is one of our main paths to victory. So, we tell you that, well, teachers will have a greater incentive because they get paid more if their students score better. Now, what do we hear from NIG in response to this? Well, firstly, they tell us that there's little incentive for teachers that don't really care because you can still live off the pay. However, the base pay that we provide is likely to be lower than it will be in like the status quo per se. So if there is really no incentive, right, you might as well change from teaching to go working at a supermarket. The base pay is going to be enough to live off, but it's not going to be so much they're going to be happy with just it. You're going to want to strive for more. I think people are innately selfish, at least to some degree, so they're always going to want more money. These teachers that don't care will still have this extra incentive because they will be able to earn more money if they do work harder and teacher. Now, the second thing they tell us is that you can already be promoted in the status quo. However, I think we have to realize that promotions sort of lean away from teaching and towards more managerial positions. Now, what does this mean? I think that in the current status quo, the progression ladder looks largely from going to teacher, say head teacher, then to a dean, then to an admin, etc., etc. You slowly move more and more away from teaching. Now, this is actually very harmful because what this means is the best teachers are getting promoted, but they're not getting promoted in terms of teaching. They're getting promoted to a more managerial role. And what does this mean? Well, I think this means that these teachers are no longer actually teaching a large number of classes. This means that the best teachers in the status quo are actually no longer being teachers, they're being deans, they're being admins. So I think on NIG's side of the house, they have to stand for a lot of these really good teachers being promoted, yes, maybe earning more money, yes, but once again, not actually teaching anymore. Before I move on to how this will impact teachers, I will take your point.
Okay, I'm really confused because at first you tell us that teachers will be given a baseline salary which is livable, and now you tell us that teachers will not be given a livable baseline salary. This is where the
I'm sorry, I don't think I ever actually said that. I said they will still be given a baseline livable salary, but once again, minimum wage is per se livable. However, it does not mean that you're going to be happy living off minimum wage. You might be in a very poor condition. You will be living, but you won't be living a successful life. So what do I think this means? I think this means this base pay will be enough to just live off. However, to live a very happy and successful life, you will have to earn some of this bonus. If you earn zero bonus, you will have enough to live. You have food on the table, you have a roof over your house. However, you won't have money to, say, go on vacations. So what does this mean? This means that there is this extra added pressure, there is this extra added incentive to do better. So, now on to how this will actually impact teachers. So, we tell you this will be better for teachers because teachers will be looked up upon because in the status quo, frankly, teaching isn't a very glamorous position. And this will mean that on our side of the house, teachers will feel like they have this chance to advance in the teaching profession, not towards managerial roles, and they'll think that better teachers will be attracted because these better teachers will be able to earn more. Now, we get two pushes from NIG on why teachers will actually be worse on our side of the house. Firstly, on cheating. Well, we have a few responses to this. Well, firstly, I think it's very easy to detect if teachers do help students teach. Any sudden increase in scores can be flagged. Secondly, I think students are likely to gossip if a teacher does help them cheat. They have this incentive seem cool. I know all students love to seem cool. It's likely to gossip about to their friends and it's likely to get out. Thirdly, most teachers do care, at least about some degree, to the students they teach, else why would they be teachers? So they're unlikely to help them cheat. 4, I think most teachers won't take the risk, because it's a huge risk if you do help your student teach, because if you're caught, essentially all of your future career prospects are ruined. And 5, as we characterized in first, you do have moderation, so it's actually very difficult to cheat, because you're not going to be the ones like marking these exams with no outside like influence. You're going to be moderated. It's very difficult to actually have them cheat. So at the end of this, I think we have to believe that the majority of teachers will not engage in cheating, and if the few that do, the majority of these ones will be caught. Thus, at best, I think NIG proves that we get a very few dishonest teachers on our side of the house, which, considering teachers usually only teach a particular student for a year, will have very minimal effect on this debate. Now, what else do they tell us? They tell us there'll be more pressure on teachers. However, I think our model covers a lot of like the negative harms of this. Teachers will be paid once again a base wage, so even though this may not be high, very high, it is once again high enough to put a roof over your head. It's high enough to feed yourself, so you don't have to worry about once again like these critical things. Thus, I think you're likely to believe that while there is pressure, it will not be so extreme as like damage their mental health. And here, I like to flip this point and say that this mild pressure is actually a good thing. Now, why is this? Well, I think it means that teachers will actually do their best to help their students as much as possible. It means that teachers will know that if they put in the effort, they can use this pressure to turn this coal into diamonds. Now, onto lower socioeconomic groups. Now, I think this is one of the main pushes we hear from NIG. I think this is the only real point which they actually bring positives on their side of the house, possibly. However, I'm going to show you why they don't actually. So, they tell us that lower socioeconomic teachers are unfairly impacted. However, I think once again this doesn't really engage with our model. Teachers are paid off, are not paid based off raw standard results. They're paid off student improvements. This means that teachers in lower decile schools actually have a greater potential to earn more money, as it's often easier to increase students' grades from, say, a 20 to a 30 than say an 80 to a 90. Why? Well, because when you're teaching them at this level is obviously basic, if you're trying to like increase it from a 20 to a 30, and relatively easy to learn. However, if you're trying to increase from say an 80 to a 90, the information is likely to be much more like niche and much more specific. Now, they also tell us that so on the socioeconomic point, they also tell us that, well, these students won't care. I have 3 main responses to this. Well, firstly, I think that some students obviously do care. You can't just say this blanket statement, say no students in low socioeconomic groups want to improve themselves, none of them want to strive. I'd actually argue, secondly, that a lot of these students actually care more than students in higher socioeconomic areas. Why? They've had to live with like the pain of being in poverty. They've had to live with all the struggle. So they do want to improve. They do want to do better for themselves. And this means that they actually are likely to care more. And I think 3, there's still some impact that as long as we can make as long as some students in these low socioeconomic areas care, then these teachers will be able to teach them more. So as long as we can help some of these students to a greater degree become more successful, become lawyers, become doctors, I think we can prove a huge benefit on our side of the house. Now, they also say that higher economic social areas will do better. I think it's one of their main pushes. However, I think this is non-exclusive. I think on their side of the house, I think on their side of the house, high socioeconomic areas are still likely to do far better. I don't see how this is really exacerbated on our side of the house. I think this is highly synonymous. So, if you care about better teachers, if you care about a better education, you can vote for side affirming. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for their speech and invite the second negating speaker.
I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Continuously, we hear false claims that teachers are mainly motivated, tired workers that have little incentive to work other than money. I think this is fundamentally untrue, as you will soon hear, but at its baseline, I think it's more common that teachers have a moral and physiological incentive just based on the fact that they chose an underpaid job under the status quo. So what will I do for you in this debate? Firstly, I'll go over 2 main points of clash that I find. Firstly, focus on enjoyment and impact on teachers, and then the incentives of teachers. But before all of that, I'd like to quickly go over some setup. And then I will go into my main split point, which focuses on teachers not focusing on social nuance, and therefore there's a lack of pastoral care, and therefore a lack of proper education for these kids while considering home life. So what do we hear in their setup that I fundamentally disagree with?
Firstly, we are told that teachers are not able to excel at all in the status quo, and we hear that managerial positions do not have a lot of teaching involved. I think that you can actually, very easily, if you are quite good at your job, get into places like heads of departments, pay raises, and things like that. And I say heads of department in particular because they do not have alterations on how much they do teaching. They just get to take a more superior role and get to run other aspects, but they still have the same amount of teaching work, which means all of their material on teachers being worsened falls out of this. Then we are told that teachers will have a livable base pay and bonuses. I think this is an idealistic way to look at this situation, but I think it's completely unrealistic to education budgets in a lot of countries, particularly in this country, right? You cannot have your cake and eat it too by saying that these teachers will be able to have a livable wage when they're already struggling to get that for all of the teachers in this country, and then also have more bonuses on top of it. I think that's completely unrealistic. Secondly on that, there are already some bonuses for exceptional teaching, which means that I don't think we even need this, right? Like in my school alone, we've seen 2 or 3 different systems that means that people who are studying while teaching get extra pay, and people who, and there's the thing called a government award, which one of my teachers just won, and she got paid upwards of $3,000 for that, right? There are already a lot of things you can get into. Next, finally on the setup, we were told that they're taking misbehaving kids into account, and these children will be factored in when they're thinking about pay. I think this then incentivizes teachers to completely ignore the kids that are struggling in their classes, or the kids that have been away for a long time, and therefore not try to uplift them because it doesn't factor into their pay count. And I think that this is fundamentally then really, really harmful to these vulnerable children. So now moving on to their main points of clash. Firstly, on enjoyment and impact of teachers and also students. Firstly, we hear that teachers mostly care about money, not students, because it's a job, living expenses, etc., and there are a lot of kids to worry about. I think this is not true for a couple reasons. So firstly, I wouldn't take a low-paying teaching job, as I've already stated, if I only cared about money. I think it's fundamentally true that teachers have a moral incentive to take this job, to then go, I'm here because I want to look after kids. As someone who works in childcare, I've seen this firsthand. Secondly, to some extent, yes, I think money is obviously an incentive for workers, but they are very, very selfless people, and I think this needs to be very, very highly weighed in this debate to note that teachers do this, not primarily for money, but primarily for the love of the game, right? Okay, next. I'll be moving on to monetary incentive, which equals greater effort, right? Which means more students' workloads, So basically, if a teacher is very, very happy and is getting paid more, they're going to have students do more work, therefore better education. I think this is really actually quite harmful for 2 reasons. I think it firstly incentivizes teachers to prioritize kids that raise the average, right? I don't think that they're actually going to be working to create a 20 to 30% gap, because that's not going to get them as significant of a pay rise as a 80 to an 100 or an 80 to a 90, because you're raising that grade average, right? Which means you can then see it in a more holistic view and go, oh, this teacher's actually getting higher scores, which means they're going to probably get paid more. Secondly, I don't think kids need more stress. This is what's going to focus on my split, and I think I'll just quickly go over that now before I continue on to the rest of my points of clash issues. So why, are teachers not going to be focusing on the social nuance and, lack of pastoral care, okay? So I think the context here is that schools need to consider the children's, personal needs and care when considering their education. I think it's definitely true that every single child is individual, and every single child has different things going on at home that need to be considered. Grades are not the be-all, end-all of an individual. It is ideal if you can get good grades, but passing is enough, I think. Without individual care and understanding, there is no way they're going to reach these higher grades. There is no way children in marginalised communities are going to become better, because they're not actually being considered on what the root cause is, which isn't their education, it's what's going on at home. And I think this is fundamental to understand. So how do we how do they worsen teacher care? Firstly, to survive, teachers are going to likely stop caring about individual home lives of children, firstly due to prioritization, but secondly because I don't think they're going to have any time. If they want to push this material, the children are going to be able to have a lot more work, they're going to make more resources because teachers are getting paid more, they're not going to have time to look after these kids, and they won't care because they want to make more money under your own definition. Because they don't have the time for this, you want to be paid enough to live with these large cohorts, because as I've said, their model under being paid at reasonable wage isn't realistic. You cannot have both these things at the same time. Even if they can, they're forcing idealization of bad grades, which I think fundamentally leads to mental health, and that is my second mechanism. When more pressure is put on kids to perform highly, because teachers will push it, I think I've explained that quite well. Unhealthy school relationships form immediately, and I think this is a tipping point analysis from going from okay mental health to very poor mental health. I think when you get that extra push of having to do an extra quiz, of having to take an extra class, children fundamentally go, I can't handle it, and you get burnout, you get all of these things which are almost guaranteed, and with the current system, we are already seeing that this is happening all the time. So I think this is a fundamental systematic issue, and by adding this extra layer, you only create more distance rather than facing it at its core. Lastly, teachers intrinsically have to give significantly less pastoral care, which means worse teacher-child relationships, worse job for the teacher, because obviously I've explained the care, and a worse job for teachers and schooling for kids. Now back on some of my rebuttal. So, we are also told that teachers are incentivize children to do enough in the status quo, but not to make kids do well, right? There's not enough money incentive to make kids want to do well. They intrinsically care about these kids, or you wouldn't take a low-paid job, as I've explained. Now I'll move on to the second point of clash they found that focuses more on incentives of teachers, right? I think I'd like to focus on a mini point of clash that I think really needs to be fed into here. How much of an incentive is money for teachers? I've already explained that it's firstly, that it's already an underpaid job, but secondly, as a slight extension, I think if they want more money, heads of departments and deans are actually not as bad of a portrayal as they'd like to push, and I think that therefore gives you more change to do both teaching and also get those awards and stuff like that. Okay. So the next thing is teaching isn't, we're told that teaching isn't prestigious, and teachers don't like their jobs because kids are difficult. Difficulties are at the systematic and social level. I don't think it's an issue of teachers simply not being good enough or not being driven enough to create change, or not being good enough or driven enough to create differences in their classrooms. I think it's the fact that children can't read properly at the moment because parents aren't teaching them how to read. I think it's the fact that the government is actively trying to upheave years upon years of systematic understanding that are now making year 11s, 12s, and 13s not understand how to do their curriculum because they've just upheaved it all and not considered literally anything. By activating these differences, we actually create a difference at the systematic level to set up children for a future that isn't based on whether or not a teacher wants a raise. Lastly, we're told it gives teachers a chance to advance, and people like to move up the ladder, which is an incentive. Then, if you shift to deaning, etc., you work towards awards. You change or you change to a private school, and that gets you paid more if you're good enough.
I thank the speaker for this speech and invite up the third affirmative speaker.
This is a debate not only about teachers, but about really how we can make sure that children have the best results possible. I think that teachers are incredibly important in this debate, but I think it's very clear that we win this debate if we can prove that we will get better outcomes for students and thus make sure that everyone who goes through the education system, which is in fact everyone who is part of every community ever in the modern world, has better outcomes. And that is how we can win this debate. Firstly, on teachers though, because teachers are how we can get those better outcomes, because they are going to be the ones teaching our children. Firstly, let's hear about what the gating team has said about this. Firstly, they said that teachers won't focus on kids' mental health, and they will only push for them to do extremely well in tests. And I think that's a very unfair characterization of how teachers work in general. We on the affirmative side of the case know that teachers know how kids work the best. They've gone through extensive training in university and understand the best ways to help children. And we know that isn't to do with pushing them extremely hard. And they've said that teachers choose a low-paying job because of their morals. And I'm like, even if you care about kids, and let's say you do this because you care about kids, you also want to have a life outside of this, especially if this is a low-paying job. So you might just care about them getting okay or good grades or passing, but you don't really have that incentive to push them extremely far, because you may be a morally sound person who is in the financial position to take a lower-paying job. But that doesn't mean that you're going to spend every waking second you feel is necessary to get them perfect, because you just don't have that. And I feel like there is also the concept of, because it's a lesser-paying job, that it doesn't have large career incentives through bonuses, you're going to have a lot less social economic people pushing for that job, especially if they're incredibly smart, because they'll push to out into other jobs, and then you get rid of a whole swath of different perspectives in your teaching facility. And so maybe you care about good morals, and you're like, maybe it's okay, this is a lower paying job, but we say that it's important that it's accessible to everyone, especially the people who can't afford to just take the lowest paying job because they think it makes them good. And they've said, there is advancement in careers through not just going to do stuff slightly outside of teachers, administrative work, heads of faculty. Two things on this. Firstly, I think there's going to be a lot of bias around choosing head of faculty, because humans inherently are biased. Maybe they'll choose the person they'll like more. Maybe the person choosing that job is racist. Maybe they're sexist. Maybe they're homophobic. There are 1,000 reasons that implicate who gets these high paying jobs that isn't just who's the best at the job. And I think that is something we have to take into consideration, as well as the fact that, one, it might just be that there's a lot of incredibly exceptional teachers, and what about then? Why do we have to choose one teacher in one whole area who gets that promotion? I think that's an incredibly unfair way to look at a system in this place. Secondly, they said, this won't work because of the education budget, and I think that's a very unfair characterization, when I think it's clear that the money we're using, we're just changing it from paying heads of faculty more to changing it so that everyone gets paid slightly more. I think that's also a just holistically fairer way to apply money as well. And they've said, there are ways that teachers can get paid through awards and etc. And that sounds very niche. Maybe these awards sound good, but I think government will take them as low as they can to still sound like they're doing a lot, but won't put a lot into it. And I'm like, I feel like you're going to have to know about these awards to apply to them. And I think that's very biased towards teachers who might not have the time to look into it. And I think that's often things from higher economical areas that you're going to know about, that people in lower socioeconomic areas who don't have people advocating for them don't have. So I think if you care about the socioeconomic teachers, which is the only real case that negating has in this entire debate, then you have to understand why you side with side affirmative. I will take a POI before I move on.
Okay, so even under your side, if teachers wanted to take care of students' mental health, can't you consider or acknowledge the fact that they only have so much energy and time in a week to put into their students, so they have to choose whether it's education or mental health?
And I think what you misunderstand is that's true on your side of the house too. But when you have an incentive to care about milk, you're going to put in the time, you're going to put in the extra effort, so you do that. And honestly, that is why you have to side with side affirmative. Secondly, onto students. This is where we win the debate, because we prove to you why teachers are going to be more incentivized to do it. And now I want to explain those impacts to you. Firstly, they've said about students, students in lower socioeconomic areas aren't going to try harder. They give this very, very small example of this kid who's absolutely swamped and has no way to pay attention in class. And I think that's not really what you see a lot in socioeconomic situations. I think you more see people who live with single parents, maybe people who just don't get a lot of food and attention at home. Those are the kind of people you see than someone who absolutely has no time. And I think with both of these examples, one with the first negating's very niche example, you're going to see a teacher who notices this kid and probably advocates more for them because they have more of an incentive to do well over a teacher who's swamped with all these other responsibilities, sees this kid not trying, and is like, well, okay, I mean, there's no incentive for them to actually go out and figure out what that problem is. And then secondly, with kids who are just lower socioeconomic, and they're going to do worse on average, and I think that's true on both sides of the house. But as we have proved to you in my first point of class, there is going to be a higher incentive for these teachers to push and help these kids. And if you care about the outcomes for socioeconomic students, you can't just say that teachers' high morals are going to push them over the edge. You have to know that humans are flawed and biased people, and even incredibly moral people at the end of the day might be like, look, maybe it would be better if I went and helped that kid out more, but I'm really tired and I want to go home. But if they also are like, look, if I help out this kid, they might do better on the test, and then I can get more money, and maybe I can go visit my mother who lives overseas. That's an incredibly stronger incentive to a person, because we all care about ourselves more. And so if you care about those lower socioeconomic kids, then you will have to understand that we on the affirmative side get a better case for them. They've also talked about higher decile kids, and they're like, especially with parents and stuff like that who will pay for more tutoring. And I think, on average, we have to bring it back to what happens in this debate. Sure, maybe in some very high economic situations, teachers might get paid a little bit more than they are on average. But I think the impact of especially lower socioeconomic teachers, with teachers who will, because it's not about doing like incredibly well, but just seeing an improvement. And if we can just be improving these kids' grades, maybe we go from them just getting achieves to getting merits, and then being like, hey, maybe I can be good at education. And you're pushing these kids to pursue further education who may have not been able to beforehand, because maybe they had a morally okay teacher who wanted to make sure all these socioeconomic kids passed their exams, but maybe they just didn't have the bandwidth to think it was worth it to push them to do further in that world. Then maybe they stay low economic for the rest of their lives, and then what you have is just less people from these worse backgrounds doing better, because we on side of affirming know that there is an education crisis. And that is something that has been pushed on a lot by side negating. But if you want to care about kids doing better, you can't just blame the parents, right? Because on both sides of the house, the parents aren't going to do well, and we just have to accept that. We have to work with what we have, which is improving the education system. We can't go into people's houses, we can go into people's schools, we can improve their teachers, we can make sure that people have better outcomes, and that is why I am so incredibly proud to negate. Bam.
I thank the speaker for their speech, and I invite up the third negating speaker.
Not everybody wants to climb the corporate ladder. Maybe you're not a fan of a classical board game, or maybe you're just a good person who wants to see kids grow and succeed. 2 points of clash in this debate. Firstly, around how low socioeconomic areas are impacted, and secondly, around how AF gets a lower quality of education in this debate. Alright, so firstly, let's take a look at these low socioeconomic areas. What we hear from third speaker in a quite uncharitable statement is that this is a very small example that happens to like a very small amount of children. When we have about 20% of children who aren't able to afford school lunches, who are like literally starving when they're going to school, who aren't able to focus in class because of this, and who are acting out, I think this is actually a very common thing in New Zealand. I think it's a little bit out of touch to say that it isn't. But even if you do believe that for some reason it isn't, I think that the fact that these kids are so uniquely vulnerable, that this education is so inaccessible to them, this will impact them for the rest of their life on such a long-term, big scale of harm, then you should care about these kids uniquely. I think that when F says that we don't have enough positive material to win this debate, I would just like to say that this is our main positive push. But even if you don't believe that, I think that we can later successfully mitigate their points enough to say that they don't have anything to stand on at the end of this debate, alright? So we hear that under F's model, they're going to take into account low socioeconomic areas of looking at grades going from 20 to 30 instead of 80 to 100 or something. I think firstly, this is quite just difficult to do, right? We have given you reasons structurally why it's just easier to go based off grades. Firstly, because it's just accessible to everybody, and secondly, it's easier to quantify, right? You can just add up all the grades of kids in a class rather than looking at spending hours and hours combing through the grades and calculating how you're going to do this. I think secondly, kids still lack an incentive to actually improve. And I'm going to take a look at this right now with a little bit of characterization that I think we might have missed down the line. If you grow up in a household where your parents have not been educated, where your parents do not value education and do not instill in you these ideas, why are you incentivized to go to school to make a change? I think that we tell you because these kids are so uniquely vulnerable and who come from impoverished areas, they actually don't have trust in the system because they are living with the pain of poverty, as Af so kindly frames. I think they don't trust their teacher. I don't think they want to go to school and believe in a system that has repetitively failed them their entire life. I think furthermore, you might even have some kids who want to spite their teacher, and if they know that their teacher's getting paid based off how well they do, they might just do badly because they have no incentive to do well, and they're just well, I really hate Mrs. Smith, so I'm just gonna bomb this exam to ha ha her, right? I think that we can also look at kids with chronic absences, right? Because these are also the kids who are most likely to be impacted by this, right? I think this is a vulnerable group of people in this debate who we should care about a lot, right? And so I'd now like to look at good teachers, because what we hear is apparently good teachers are just going to stay at these schools because they still have an incentive to get these kids graded up from a 20 to a 30. I think that what we look at is that these good teachers who stay in poorer schools, they do this because they think that they can make a positive change. They don't do this for the pay because these teachers do often, as agreed by both sides, face very difficult students who just make their jobs very hard. Teaching overall is just a very stressful and difficult job, which means the only reason why you would stay in this position in the first place is if you just truly believed out of the goodness of your heart that you are making a positive change. I think that when this comes at the cost of your salary decreasing, this is a massive incentive for good teachers to move out of poorer schools, to go to maybe middle class or richer schools where they are more likely because they believe that kids have more of a capability to increase their grades. I think this is so dangerous, alright? Why? Because we're going to weigh this on the time, right? As my first speaker has pointed out, this is a cyclical compounding harm. If we have good teachers continually moving out of low socioeconomic areas, those kids are never going to grow up to get a good education. Those kids are not going to be able to grow up to get a good job. They're just going to continue stuck in this cycle. This is so important in this debate. And even if you don't believe this happens on a wide scale, these are the most vulnerable groups in society we're talking about. These are the people who commit the most crime, who are the victims of the most crime, who live genuinely horrible lives because they are stuck in this system. I think that if you care about these people and if you believe that this happens to maybe even 5% of the population under F side, that is bad enough for us to just completely win this debate, right? But now, I'll take that really quickly.
What is more likely to get better education outcomes for minorities? Completely ousting the root causes of inequality or giving more in reward for teachers who put in the work for them?
I would say completely ousting the root causes of inequality. Alright, so now let's look at the point of clash about how this decreases the quality of education. I think that all we have to do is now that we've proven our positive material, if we can just prove that this is worse under their side as compared to the status quo, then we just win this debate, right? Alright, so we hear in a very interesting take from second speaker that they're going to make the minimum wage they're going to pay teachers minimum wage, which is livable. Firstly, that's just debatable in of itself. But I think secondly, this means that they just have to contend with all of the harms that we have told you down the line of then, some teachers are just not able to get their students to perform highly. Some teachers are just going to be paid $60 a day, right? Which is just not livable. I think thirdly, what this, under the status quo, teachers don't get paid a lot, right? You just don't see teachers rolling in the dough, going on really expensive trips 10 times a year. So you're just going to get a very small margin of change. I think that you also have to deal with all of our material on the decentralization. When you're telling teachers, oh hey, you're getting paid not a lot, now you're going to get paid even less to stick in this job, which is really bad for your mental health, and when you face all of this added stress. I think this is going to make just the teacher shortage worse. And we also hear that like good teachers are going to move away from teaching to admin. I think firstly this is just untrue because then you're just like not going to have anybody teaching admin, right? Like a school can't operate itself. I think secondly, good teachers who actually enjoy teaching and are in it for like their own incentives are just going to stay. And I think thirdly, like there are just limited admin positions, right? I think even if you believe that teachers are all punching themselves in the staff room to like get a deputy principal job, they're just like not all able to get that. So some teachers will like just have to stay teachers. We also hear that teachers have gone through training and know how to teach. I think this just quite frankly mitigates all of AF's own material about why teachers would be so incentivized by this, right? Because if we do believe this push from them, that teachers have gone through training and know how to teach, then I don't see why under their side they would get any better quality of education because teachers will just be going through the same training either way, right? So now let's look at like why, like the incentives of teachers as like a little sub-clash under this point of clash. I think there's several reasons why teachers do their jobs. Maybe firstly because they just enjoy working with kids. Secondly, because they think education's important and they want to like contribute to this. Thirdly, because it is actually satisfying to see hard work pay off. I think that if you're trying to claim this under your side, we can claim this under our side as well. Because if you are a good teacher and your kids' grades improve either way, this is just symmetrical. We can like claim this equally under our side. Fourthly, because you've like been inspired by others, maybe your previous teachers, to make a positive change. And fifthly, just because you are a good teacher and you believe you have a unique ability to make this positive change. All right. So when we what we think we do is we just add to the stress of this job when we say that your entire like pay is just going to be based off of like how well your students are doing. I think this is really bad. Again, it just adds to this decentralization for teachers. Alright, and so now let's look at how this is actually going to be implemented because we hear that it's like easy to see cheating for a few reasons. I think firstly, teachers will just be able to implement this gradually. You know, I think it's pretty easy to like have them fake actual improvement. I think secondly, if all students benefit, they're probably not going to gossip and like tell their parents about it if they're the ones who are actually benefiting from like getting better grades. Alright, and even like moderating exams, there's actually no way to see if teachers like provided like results to their students. I think this kind of just falls out. But I think lastly, what I'd like to look at is like unhappiness and stress of students. Because if you are a teacher and your entire pay now depends on how well your students do, you now are like forcing onto them these ideas that they must get good grades. Like we're debaters, we know what academic validation feels like in the drive for that, right? I think this creates a lot of stress on these students. I think this is very unfair. This makes them work worse in class, right? Ultimately, at the end of this, I think this is just this leads to very bad quality of education. I think we can weigh this on like the scale that this achieves, which is just very low, and I think it's unfair for teachers to be paid based off things that they can't control. I am very proud to negate.
I thank the speaker for their speech, and as is customary, reverse the speaking order, so I invite the main reply.
Oh yeah, you'll get the whole debate in 2 minutes. Okay. Look, I think the only thing we had to prove in this debate is why education is so much worse, and we literally have already done that, but I'll explain it to you again. Obviously, the biggest point of clash was the quality of education. I think we won this point of clash by 1,000,000 miles, right? Here are the things we told you. First of all, we told you that under the status quo, things like performance reviews already exist. There are already mechanisms in place to ensure that schools are ensuring their students are performing to a base level, like a base standard, and they will be investigated if this does not happen, is not met. Note they never contest this, so this still stands by the end of this debate. We can still prove that there is still a level of care and mechanisms under our side. We also claim the fact that we can take their non-mutually exclusive pay rise, right? It got a bit muddled here, but I think we can just say these teachers will be paid a livable wage because that's the most generous statement for their case. We can still get that. It's not an exclusive thing to this, side, but regardless of this, Izzy has already given you so much material as to why teachers aren't just in this for the pay and they don't need this pay rise in order to stay and in order for education to be decent, right? It isn't the only incentive for teachers, right? But regardless, we still get this better pay under our side, and therefore we can claim all the benefits that AF outlines to us that you get in education when teachers are simply just paid better. We just think that this is like a huge benefit. Henceforth, I'm sorry, but that is a huge amount of positive material for our side. Apologies if that was unclear. But like also, what we say here is like F loses a large proportion of teachers. Note I gave you the mechanism on the fact that teachers now just don't want to be teachers anymore because they view their jobs as being largely unstable. I gave you analysis as to why teaching jobs are stable. Note there was very little engagement from their side on this mechanism. Therefore, the worst harm that they can get, or one of the worst harms that they get, is that they lose teachers at the top. But I also told you that they will lose teachers at the bottom because now it is viewed as an unstable job to get into in the first place. Again, they do not contest this. This is a massive harm that they do have to face, even if it doesn't happen to the point where you're losing 100% of teachers. It is massive when you already are dealing with international teacher shortages. This can be weighed on a huge scale of harm under their side. What we also tell you is this is worse for like students who are underperforming because teachers stop caring about them in entirety. We're told, like we're given a little bit of, oh no, teachers still care. But again, I told you all the way at first as to how this simply just does not work under their performance model, where they say they just exclude kids who underperform anyway, therefore teachers don't have a lot of incentive. No, we gave you a lot of material on the fact that teachers have limited like amounts of energy. And we also gave you a lot of material on why teachers have a really high incentive to push students really, really far. They quite literally said that. Note, this is a quote that I just took from their third speech, that teachers now have an incentive to push students academically. We already gave you all of the harms of this. So the worst case for them, like they just have huge harms to students' mental well-being and also to just teaching as a whole. This is really, really bad. At the best for them, we can symmetricize like a lot of these like views in terms of the money, but I just think we've already proven to you that that just isn't the case. Okay, now in terms of vulnerable students, look, they just don't give us any positive material here, so we just inherently win this point. But I will tell you why this is so important and should be weighed very highly in this debate. Look, we tell you that there are two different types of students. You've got students who are just never going to be able to perform highly, but we also tell you there are students who have systemic barriers to their performance. Note that they only give us engagement with the systemic barriers, therefore all the material we gave to you on the students who just can't perform highly still stands. Therefore, this really high level of harm happens under their side because once again, teachers just don't necessarily care, just don't care about them as much. That is a side that is that is the side that is affirming. This is why we win today's debate.
Thank the speaker for their speech and invite up the AFT-Apply to close out the debate.
Nick has outlined that children face many difficulties in the classroom. However, this is part of teaching. But on side affirmative, this doesn't mean that we give up. Instead, we reward those who help these children and encourage teachers to do so. We don't just blame root causes and move on like negating without actually fixing the problem. Two main questions in this debate. Firstly, how are lower socioeconomic individuals affected? And secondly, how are the educational outcomes on either side? Now, on to lower socioeconomic individuals. Note, this is the main substantive push from negating. However, frankly, there's very little actual positive impacts to their side of the house. So, what do they tell us? Well, they tell us that, quote, these kids don't trust the system, they don't want to go to school. However, we tell you that this is the exact same on negating's side of the house. Their only actual substantive contribution contribution and the only actual possible path to victory is the material on how good teachers will leave these schools. Once again, let me reiterate to you, this is actually the only real substantive contribution. This is the only path to your ballot. However, we give you quite a few responses to this and why they don't actually get the impacts that they claim. Well, firstly, most good teachers are frankly not in lower socioeconomic areas in the status quo. Most good teachers are classically those who are more educated and they're likely to gravitate towards better schools. Secondly, most importantly, good teachers will actually be drawn to their schools, to these low socioeconomic schools under our side. As Nick themselves brought up earlier, you can't improve on an A+. However, you can improve on a C, a D, or an E. This means that if the teachers are paid more for improvement, like they are under our model, this means that they're going to be paid more when they go to these lower socioeconomic schools, when they can help uplift these children, instead of when they go to the richer schools, where there is straight up A+, and they'll be paid less. So I think this actually flips a lot of their harms, because you actually get better teachers going to these lower socioeconomic schools on our side of the house. Now thirdly, in regards to these students' mental health, counsellors are not teachers. Very rarely is your teacher at, say, like Fraser, the one that's keeping you afloat. Often, if there is someone at school, it's going to be your counsellor. It's very, not often, it's the teacher. So, I think that at their best case, there are a few better teachers at these poorer schools. However, note, this is still quite unlikely due to what I said earlier. However, I think the scale is quite frankly minuscule compared to all the better education you get outside of the house. Even if you do perhaps uplift a very few small number of these minority groups, I think frankly this doesn't outweigh if you can help the 80+% of the population get better educational outcomes. Even though they are the most vulnerable, that doesn't automatically mean they are more important than your average day citizen. Now to educational outcomes in general. And note, I think this is the most important part of the debate. The purpose of the educational system is to frankly educate students. I think that if we can improve educational outcomes, improve on our side of the house, due to the long-term benefits this will bring, I think you have to give us the debate. So what have we said? Well, to sum up our points, there's an increase in incentive for teachers as they will be paid more in proportion to effort, because as you put in more effort, this means that your outcomes are going to increase. That means that your students are going to get better outcomes. And I think we get better teachers as their best. I think we get better teachers as the best key teachers can also earn large bonuses, and the poor and dispassionate teachers are likely to gravitate away from schools because once again they're not going to be earning a big bonus anymore. They're going to be earning perhaps a livable wage, but not any bonuses. Now, we have negative two things in response to this. Firstly, they will lose teachers. However, once again, we're going to be losing all the poorer teachers, as we said. All the better teachers will actually be incentives to start teaching, because once again, all the better teachers will be paid more because they'll get better outcomes to students. And the other main response is that a moral incentive exists. Great, we agree with this. However, on our side of the house, teachers have this exact same moral incentive. Nothing changes in this, except that there's an additional financial incentive. So, what you believe at the end of this point is that on our side of the house, the exact same moral incentive actually does exist, as on side negating. However, on our side, we get this additional incentive. This means that even in our worst case, we still have some sort of additional incentive, and this will at least give us some benefits in regards to educational outcomes, and that is why I'm so proud to affirm. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for their speech, and I thank both teams for the debate. Invite you to cross the floor, shake hands, and if everyone may leave the room to our judges for delivery.
Good job.
That is your favourite, and it's not us. Good job. Good job, thank you. Good job. That was so good. No, I know, me too. I